I can see the levels going up and down. That means we are live with Robett Hollis, who is live with us in, did you say San Francisco? I've forgotten to read it already.
San Francisco, yeah.
San Francisco.
Bay Area.
And look, I know that you probably get this all the time, and I'm sorry, it's a probably terrible thing to start asking you, but your name is so unique. It's a combination of two of your grandparents' names. Is that right? Robett?
Yeah, Ron and Betty. My mother's parents decided to name me Robett, Ron, Betty. The thing I was very blessed with is that they were legends. Yeah. It would suck to be named after people who were shit. And Papa was just such a G, you know, farmer, goes to war, comes back, marries Nana, moves to the farm, doesn't leave. Married for 60 plus years straight. It's pretty awesome. And just that consistency of really having, you know, what mattered most sort of so early, and then just being such epic role models, I think when you're young is really good to have. So I'm super stoked to be named after such weapons and legends. And as well, it's probably one of the things that has actually made me probably a pretty good communicator, I'd say, because my parents always told me, they were like, Nana and Papa are awesome. If anyone ever says your name wrong, tell them how to say it. So from the age of 3, I've basically been like correcting adults. Just like, no, my name's Robett, you know, and you know, being fearless to talk to people and whatever else. It probably set me up. I was probably set up with a bunch of advantages early through that. So, but yes, you're right. It's from my grandparents, Ron and Betty.
And it's all really, I always think it's really important to get names correct. I think that when people come to the country or come from overseas and they've got, I guess what could be described as a foreign name, whatever that means, but a name based in another language, and they typically change it, you know, especially from the Asian culture, they'll come to New Zealand, they'll anglicize their name. I always think it's a bit of a sad thing. You know, I've had the mother of my children has a very unique name, and it was always really important to get that name right. And when I sit down and talk with people now, you know, not just in this kind of context, but whatever, I'm like, and how do you pronounce your name? And often it's interesting because often they're a bit like, oh, you know, it's fine. But I'm like, no, your name is, you know, a part of your identity. It's a part of your story. It's often with people, there's meaning behind it from their parents, and I think it's really important to acknowledge people by their name correctly. And I think it's cool that you do that, and you haven't shortened it to, you know, what would it be, shortened Ro or something? But you just and you stick with the name. I think that's cool.
And I've always been, when I had my first cell phone at 11, I always have answered the phone forever saying, kia ora, Robett speaking.
Yeah.
So people would always know that I was proud to be Māori. People always know how to say my name. And it's funny because it was so uncool to lead with culture for so long. And then now you're seeing CEOs and shit, you know, chucking stuff up there, which is mega. I think it's flipping great. But so I like to stay consistent, and I like to, just by design, you know, like living by design in certain ways is a bit more meaningful, I think, when it's instead of just blah, like, oh no, it doesn't matter. It's like, no, shit matters. Your name matters. Where you're from matters. Who you are matters, you know.
You're a really interesting cat. I've been really looking forward to having a chat with you. I kind of heard about you when you were doing work with Aotearoa, and a lot of people won't know what that is, but my vibe on what that was a kind of a pilot plan for a podcasting studio in Auckland, and to see how that would work and what that would look like, sort of thing. Is that a fair, kind of incredibly short synopsis of what you were doing? A project that we had, it was actually 5 years in the making in many respects through Sky, and then they had basically kicked off again with another pilot, and then COVID hit. They went a different direction with it, and the pilot stopped, but the core essence of it was essentially, how do you create a social TV network, but funded through a platform that needed to change and pivot in the digital times. And it was a bit of a no-brainer of what media company that should be first. And if I'm speaking honestly, I think they probably made a mistake by not tripling down on what happened, because right as COVID happened, no one could go anywhere. And what did everyone do? Go home and started streaming. It's like, we covered this. And if they're not watching TV, they're on social. But the commercialization of the social space is something that I've been harping on for years amongst many things that I've done in bits and pieces. But yeah, that was switch. It is interesting because for a long time, so my background is in radio. It's been 20 years in radio and done a bunch of that. The saying has always been content is king, content is king, content is king, content is king. And there are a bunch of people out there who are like independent. They're sitting in their basements, in their bedrooms. They're using their local public broadcaster, their sort of community radio station to make podcasts or make videos or make content. And they've got all this content. And I don't know if it was around the same time, but I remember talking to a couple of companies around then going, hey, there's a bunch of us out here who have literally thousands of hours of content. Everyone's sitting at home during COVID, provide us a platform, let's set up a free-to-air digital channel temporarily for 6 weeks and get everyone just to upload their stuff there where people can then watch it at home. But yeah, they didn't seem to want to, I don't know. I think maybe if we can call them mainstream media, I do hate that term, but if we can, are a bit threatened by independents out there that kind of they can't control and can do what they want and say what they want, whereas within that core of the rules around broadcasting, it's a bit more structured and they can have a bit more control. Like you can go to the example of, I remember I was at ZB when the Tony Veach situation all happened, and of course we weren't allowed to talk about it, so that was real control through to the kind of language and kind of advertisers they want. So they pitched their broadcasting to their a la John Banks on Magic just the other day.
No, I get it. And it is intensively complex the further you get into it, because the higher up the food chain you go, the more you realize how the commercialization of content is intertwined with politics and people and bullshit. And that goes directly heads up against independent free speech and people. And I've literally seen both sides of it, and I understand both sides of it. And it's a similar thing around, my thesis with Frontside, my media company, before we got acquired by Saatchi&Saatchi was, I'm a speedboat, they're a cruise ship, I'm fast, they're slow, I'm this, that. It's the exact opposite, which is exactly why those things can work. But you need to and a good friend of mine said, it's easy to sit on the outside and talk shit about something until you've got inside and actually see why. And it wasn't, and I think it's the fair thing. So I always, maybe in my 20s, a bit more offensive against things which I knew were stuffed, and I still 100% believe they're stuffed. I didn't understand why. Now in my 30s, I'm seeing that, and I've got to see a lot more of that. And so I think I've maybe got a little bit more empathy and understanding of why. But to your point, Pat, exactly, is end of the day, whoever can harness and consolidate the power of the fragmented many that are out there doing good things and can get distribution and commercialization behind it, I have a funky feeling that movement is going to create a lot more waves, and eventually someone's going to do it. So I'm interested to see who's brave enough to take this week to actually do it.
Yeah.
So you're definitely right.
It comes across a little bit like I always think about like the opposition in government. The opposition in government can promise what they want, and they can, they can make any claim and they can say, we will do it this way. But then when they're in power, they have handcuffs on them because there's restrictions that maybe budgetary wise they can't do what they said they could. So when you're in the business, you face some of the restrictions that you don't when you're outside. When you're in opposition, you can claim to be able to do it. We would have done it this way, but you don't have the responsibility to have to do it that way. So you can say what you want and do what you want.
Yeah, Pat, but I think the bit which I've probably found even more intriguing over all of it is, as soon as you get a seat at the table, there is such a huge disconnect between what the public see and what the private know and what actually happens behind it in terms of relationships and money and, all sorts of stuff that surrounds it. And the complexities of those relationships and power and speed and hierarchy and politics and co-opetition and partnerships and commercialization, those things are 100% real. And it's so tricky. That's why I've said multiple times, I'll never get into politics. I'll never do this and that, because the game of chess that you have to navigate is so, the energy gets dispersed into worrying about other people instead of the actual purpose of what you're there for. And that's something that I don't have time for. So I will just happily continue to do my thing my way, because I don't think I could, even my intentions may be right. I don't think the execution of it would be very sustainable for the long term of a change of how I'd like to see the world be.
I talked about you being an interesting cat, and one of the things I find most interesting about you, as I bring up a computer screen here for people who are watching to see, which is your website. This is written on the top of your website: LinkedIn's top 3 most influential New Zealanders, Metro Magazine's top 10 invaders of the year, KiwiBank New Zealander of the Year nominee, Fortune 100 content consultant, keynote speaker, and author. And it seems that anyone who's anyone knows who you are, and I no disrespect intended with this, because I know that you sort of say this when you were doing your some of your business conferences, is you seem to be New Zealand's most famous unknown person. And just to give context to people who haven't seen any of your works, I've watched some of your videos and stuff. You often get up the front of a conference and you'll say, hands up, who are the people in the audience who didn't know my name before this was set up, and a lot of hands go up. But you look at what you've done and what you've achieved, and the reason I'm coming to this is you talk about having a seat at the table. You seem to have a seat at the table now in many areas of life. You seem to have inroads in many areas of life, but like I said, not a lot of people probably know your name as they would know the name of someone else who has not a seat at the table, but they're not even necessarily in the car park of the building where the table's at.
Yep. I'm trying to figure out how to smartly answer this.
Don't be smart, just be real. I'm not smart. I like being the dumbest person in the room. Just have fun.
No. You kind of stunned me a little bit, because what I've realized, and especially let's say this last phase of my life, let's go through things, is potentially there is more influence. Let's call it influence / power / whatever. I don't have a title. I don't have a job description. I don't have an engine that, it's not like I am the CEO of Fortune 100 company, NZX 50, stuff you. Give me props or kudos or time or respect because I have a title. Title is temporary relevance. I think relationships are the currency, and I think when they know your intent, and I'm a hip hop kid, right? Like I grew up with Dr. Dre, Michael Jordan, whatever.
Cool.
Lil Wayne has this line. He says, "Real G's move in silence like lasagna." Right? The G is silent, and recently I've really taken that to heart of understand that the true power exists where you don't actually see it, and true influence happens where you're not trying to be seen. So by 100% design, the majority of everything that I've ever done publicly or privately isn't seen publicly. 99% of people didn't know that wifey was pregnant until pop up, hey, here's a baby. Everyone's like, what the fuck? And I didn't say a flipping word, like so much. No one knows who's in my inner circle. No one knows who I talk to. And my relationships that I build with people, they know that there's not a flipping chance of how I'm saying anything to anyone. So I always say, look, I wouldn't have got to where I am if I told people what I knew, number one. And two, because I know a lot of people, and they know me. Our relationships are so tight that I know a lot of shit that I probably shouldn't. The reality is I shouldn't know half the shit I do. So, but life isn't about that. And I think the intention's right. So to answer your question is, I think the day I stand up in a room and every single person knows what I'm doing, I think that means it's game over.
So does that mean, therefore, if you had an opportunity to have a job with profile, you would turn it down because of the profile?
I have done. Yep.
Can you give us an example?
Multiple boards, multiple CEO seats, and a bunch of different commercial opportunities with equity. But I knew what was actually happening behind the scenes. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, if you tick a lot of the boxes for the other side, they're not using you for your brain. It's usually because at a certain time in 2020, you are a very convenient young Māori tech entrepreneur, ... I don't want to have a seat at the table because I'm Māori, or it's not good for I call it for I don't want to win. It's pretty good for a Māori. Oh, for a guy who failed high school, for a dude who couldn't get into university, I want to win because it's good. Oh, and I'm proudly Māori, and I'm proudly from Aotearoa, Christchurch, from Aotearoa Ventures, and I'm proudly, doing my thing. So I have to juggle that a lot of the time. and as well, it's a bit tricky too, because now I'm 35 now. I'm not a spring chicken, and I feel mentally, I'll always be humorous at heart and young and soulful and playful, but mentally I feel like a flippin' pretty old dude now, just by the people that I've been able to be around. And I feel a lot wiser than I was at 25, but I know when I'm 45, I think I'm a muppet now. So I think it's always that journey of where you're going to where you're from, and that self-awareness around it,
Yeah, I think it's always really important to accept and understand that you never stop learning. I also think, though, it goes in two ways. I remember when I was probably the arrogance of my youth, although I talk about my youth being in my 30s and you are in your 30s, it's kind of ironic. I talk about the arrogance of my youth. I was working on News Talk ZB when I was in my 30s, so talking to primarily 60, 70, 80-year-olds. I had a confrontation with one of them one night, because that's typically what happened with me, where I said to them, how arrogant you are to think just because you're older it means you're wiser. I think it's important to know, this is what I do for me as well, thinking about people who are younger than me, that often they know more and they're wiser in an area or two areas or all areas of life. I mean, I wouldn't challenge a 35-year-old brain surgeon on brain surgery. It just goes without saying that you continue to learn, and just because you're at this particular age or number in your life doesn't mean that those who aren't at that number yet know less and have learned less. But we're all on the journey of learning, and we're all kind of learning our own stuff and moving forward, mate.
No, I was just going to bring up an email. I do this like little newspaper article thing that I do out called Robett's Ramble, and I put one up of here you go, young bucks versus old dogs. Some old people in business are just haters who won't accept ideas and learn from youth on how things could be. On the flip side, some young people in business are also just too narrow-minded, naive, and stubborn, who won't accept advice and listen from the older and wiser on how things could play out. Balancing where you're going versus where you've been gives each individual a specific perspective. The challenge is to see both sides, learning and listening. You can't learn if you won't listen. It's funny, when you said that, I was like, shit, I just was talking about this. So it spoke true to me, Pat. Bloody A-okay.
Yeah. I remember I did, I don't like talking about this so much because I was terrible, and the best thing for the New Zealand education system was me getting out of teaching. But I did teaching for a couple of years way back in my early 20s. And I remember you'd meet two kinds of older teachers. You'd meet the older teachers who would see a new teacher, a beginning teacher, straight out of college, and going, they're new, they're young, they don't know anything, stay away from me, sort of thing. And you'd meet the same age teachers with the same sort of experience and go, they're new, they're young, they're straight out of university, maybe they've learned something new. Maybe we can get something from them. And those were the kinds of teachers that were inspiring to sort of sit under and learn from as well. Because then it was a learn from, you'd much more likely learn from that person who was saying, maybe I can learn from you, than learn from someone who was saying, stay away from me. So when you get that mutual kind of conversation going on, that mutual respect for, you might be younger, but you know shit I don't. You might be older, but you've got more experience than me. That becomes symbiotic. And that becomes the best kind of relationship. You still with me? There we go.
Me? Yo.
There we go. We're back.
I was just saying, it's like mentorship, silently, like you'll have an older mentor that you're with or talk to, and you don't realize that they get energy out of youth and ideas and inspiration and spark and the drive, so it is a two-way street with it for sure. What I probably do feel though is that the opportunity when you are in a position of power or influence, or if you are breaking those doors down first, it's a responsibility and a duty to open it wider for others. It's your responsibility to create more breadcrumbs of positivity. It's your responsibility, because if you don't, especially with, I know in New Zealand, for the lanes that I've gone through, there's no one that's looked like me, rolled like me, talked like me, act like me, dressed like me, any of that shit. So that means I'm the first. So if I'm the first, that means that anyone else that's 15 or 20 or 25 that looks like me, rolls like me, talks to me, they haven't seen anyone until me. Now, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I'm saying the person that looks like the character of me, that might be young or Māori or this or that or whatever those things are, I think it is your duty. And I have really taken that to heart. And I'm obviously only 35 and I want to play this game for 100 more years. But I learned at 30 that you need to go from a transitioning piece of, proving yourself to others to actually providing value to the platform which you've now created. Like that was very clear for me at a very early age, and most recently with that. So, what I hope it means is, that 15-year-old Rangi from Rotorua that has seen a breadcrumb of a video of me somewhere, be like, oh, dope, that guy's in business and he can wear a t-shirt. Mean. Oh, that guy says shit and it's all good and he hooks up with MasterCard. Mean. Oh, that guy, like those ideas of what could be, I think are so important to do regardless what lane it is. That's why I talk about these lanes of, if that's your lane, there's 1,000 more that are going to look like you that are going to come after you. And if no one's been there before, that's on you to make it wider, because the greatness of that next person could actually make the world a better place, or make New Zealand, or have ideas that go from creativity to commercialization to the real world. That's impact. So I know, I guess, shit, I'm just at a different sort of space in my life right now. I see things a lot differently. Very fortunate enough to have built the relationships that I've had, and whether they be right or wrong, I know they're valuable for hopefully both sides, and I'm getting to learn a lot from it. And simultaneously, because you put so much of yourself out there, it's a timestamp for my children's children to see, oh, that's how he thought at 20. Oh, that's how he thought at 25. That's how he thought at, and I would have absolutely loved to see if we were 100 years in the future, and then I could be named Robett after my grandparents, but then see him going to war, coming back at 26, seeing when they first got power, seeing them getting the radio, seeing them getting black television, seeing them getting the color television, seeing them getting, just that whole like documentation of actual existence with the headspace of what they thought and how they thought and why they thought it. Whether it be right or wrong, I know that someone's going to see this in 100 years and be like, holy shit, this is where he is at. It's a funky, it's very weird. I'm living in my life right now, but I'm so also seeing what the future's going to be as it's happening, because I've already seen it play out multiple times already, so I know.
I was talking to a 19-year-old yesterday or the day before, and just hearing you tell your story about your grandfather and what he saw through his life, thinking about what exists now that didn't exist when I was born. And so, like, for me, it's like I can understand life without the internet. I remember sitting at a bus shelter when I was at secondary school at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon after cricket practice, just basically having to be bored, that sort of thing. Whereas my mum used to tell a story about, no refrigerator and the iceman turning up and putting a block of ice in the bottom of the safe and all these things that we saw through life. And I was talking to her and I was saying, what's going to be the thing for you that when you get to 40, 50, 60, 70, you'll look back and your kids and your grandkids will be saying, geez, really, Nana, that you didn't have technology iteration, whatever that is, that's been there for their whole lives? Because for my kids, the internet's been here their whole lives. One of the stories I tell is my 14-year-old. I'm quite a good juggler. My 14-year-old asked me if I learnt juggling when I was a kid by watching YouTube videos, because they've just got no concept that at one stage in the world it didn't exist. It's a really interesting thing to think about how the world goes on. A friend of mine once said, the world has never moved as fast as it's moving right now, and it will never move this slow again. I think about that a lot, and I go, wow, what's to come?
I agree. It's because it's tech-driven, but yep, agree.
You talked about the when you're the one with the influence, opening doors for others. Do you feel a burden for that? Because I would think typically in most conversations you have, you are the one with the influence, just from what you do and what you get around and how you speak publicly and, the things you're setting up and the doors you're trying to open, that most of the time you would be the one with the influence. Does that weigh on you?
No, because I have to. It's a duty. Like, I know that I've done really good in some stuff. I've done super shit in some other stuff. But the next person who rolls up me, looks like me, or that I can aspire to do, that's smarter than me, that did go to university or that did study some great stuff or that is better at ... Hell yeah, that's great. And I think about, I get, my greatest fear is future regret. And for others, like there's nothing worse than when, if I'm in the room with someone knowing that they're not happy with where they're at, but then I think about shit, in 20 years time, if you don't actually change, you're going to wake up and have regretted the last 2 decades or 3 decades. You can't get that back. And when you can't get that back, it's lost. It's for, like, you can make more money, you can do this, you can do that, but you can't get that time. So I think about the fear of future regret. And when things come up my way, I'm like, okay, well, will I regret this in the future if I don't? most of the time, stuff it. Let's flip and let's giddy up and go. And, you know, I think that's the only thing you should fear is future regret. And then it'll probably enable you to be braver sooner, to try more shit, to do what you actually like. Because as you get older and people around you, you know, there'll be health stuff and real world stuff and just real world shit. Most stuff doesn't matter. Like, actually, just like, it's like, cool, bro. Me, like the biggest wave of that is I thought, oh yeah, my initial thing was, I want to become a billionaire, own the Auckland Raiders.
Right.
And then I had my first daughter and I realized, you know what, for me to do that, I have to work 80 hours a week for the next 50 years. I will never see my children or be a present father. Wifey might start, you know, taking a second glance at the pool boy. And if I'm just this non-existent being, do I want the legacy being, oh yeah, dope, like he had heaps of money, but like his kids don't even know him, and his, you know, like that, I can't do that. And then it just is an instant flip of, you know, I think you find a balance, you know, of what you feel your true happiness can be, and it changes for everyone. But the thing I've seen time and time again with rich people who I know, is their bank account's full, but a lot of their personal stuff's not to the same level, and that's because certain things have been prioritized. So what I want to try and balance in the future is, how can I be totally pumped for me creatively going after I want, you know, commercially or with community or within content or creativity or whatever these things are, mixed with also then being present dad, trying to be a real good mate to my good friends, trying to be, you know what I mean? And I think that's where those lines come of like what's private and what's personal, and kind of keeping those two things pretty separate as well. Because yes, you can be known and have other people like know you and help them, and that's all great. But you know, if you don't keep a lot of stuff for yourself, then your existence can't be at the pure reason of others being there to either exploit or feel like that's theirs. You just lose yourself if you give everything to others, you know?
I wonder how you feel, and I'll use the word privilege. I mean, that may be the wrong word. You can change it and expand on that. I wonder how you feel about the privilege of being in that position. I sometimes think about, you know, you watch a Grammy award-winning artist, and they go, oh, you know, I don't do it for the awards. I don't do it for the awards. Well, they've got 9 Grammys sitting behind them. It's easy to say, I don't do it for the awards when they've got 9 Grammys there. I mean, you've obviously, you're really smart. You've worked really hard. You've got really good ideas. And because of all of that, you've been able to choose to then make that life choice that you've just made, versus, you know, let's say the dude living in Manukau who has to work at the factory 60 hours a week to pay for his, you know, for his kids and that kind of stuff, and he can't be quite as present. How do you feel about that you've got? And I don't mean privilege like, because the thing of that sometimes when we talk about privilege, like be it white privilege or something like that, is it's something you haven't earned. It's like something that's put upon you and you've got no control over, right? So it's not that. I'm not talking about that, but there is another way to use that context, the word of the privilege, and it's like I'm lucky almost to have this opportunity. What do you think about the opportunity that you can make that choice? Because obviously you might not be a billionaire buying the Raiders, but you're doing all right. You know, you've had a couple of, I don't know what you're worth or what the finances were, but you've had a couple of exit strategies from a couple of businesses that you ran and that sort of stuff. And obviously you're doing work all over the world at the moment. So you're able to make that decision of being more present for your kids when others can't. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about having the ability to do that?
Well, I was gifted with skills, and then I chose insane effort and determination and drive and strategic shit. Now, am I where I want to be fully with it? No, not at all. 100% not, because the drive for me to where I want to go and know I can go is always going to be higher. But the conversion of the hustle into a bit more freedom is 100% real. And I think at the end of the day as well is, when I started traveling around the world and I was, you know, working off a laptop, I mean, essentially I had a remote business from 2003 when I first started a little website that I coded and built. I had an email and I had, you know, then I did some e-commerce stuff or whatever. So now in 2020, when lockdown happens, I actually realized it flipped, and the liability of me being away actually turned to its biggest asset, because everyone was now forced to exist and commercialize on a computer. And I was like, wait a second, I've done this shit for literally 20 years.
Yeah.
I flipping know exactly what the gig is. And so mentally it was a huge shift for me, because I always felt that, if I wasn't in New Zealand physically, there was no conversion of energy into output, right? Like, I'm in a room and then I can bring the energy and the hype and the buzz and blah, 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 and make shit happen. And then all of a sudden, I'd always thought that when I was away, I'd be kind of fear of missing out, like, yes, I'm, with my wifey's families and stuff from over here, and both my kids been born here, and obviously I'd travel back and forth every sort of couple of weeks or whatever, every month or so. Then it flipped, because I realized that it was full an asset, and I knew exactly how to do it, because I've commercialized shit digitally for almost 20 years now. I know how, and so I was like, and then the whole world kind of opened up, because then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, isn't it great? We can do this, this, this. I'm like, dude, I've been doing this shit for ages. And it kind of felt almost empowering. But to answer your question though, I'm fortunate that my skill sets exist in a space where I physically don't need to be anywhere anymore. And the scalability of a good team that you trust, and being able to communicate through the internet and technology. If you rewind 20 years, I couldn't have done this. My timing of my skill set with technology has enabled me to hit a couple of nice waves. Same with my granddad didn't have fiber. He had a black and white television, but what if he was built like me? What would his outlet be? Does he try and start a local newspaper and do a radio? I mean, I think the intersection of a human's existence at the point of society's technology and access and whatever else, it sets a formula up for different types of success. When they always talk about, oh, you're too early. Shit, I was 5 years too early with Switch, and I'm still too early. So I feel that privilege comes in all forms, but I feel like now, I get to experience some pretty dope shit, right? I do some cool flipping shit. I'm hyped when I get to go do blah, 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 blah. But every single person that then knows me knows the kid of where I was from. They know that I was like hyped to go to my mate's house because his mum had cheese to put on my CC chips. They know that I had, snake my buddies, Nikes that were stuffed in the background. They know I hired a flipping bathtub in a buddy's house for $40 a week in the middle of winter, chucked my shit in the bathtub, slept on the floor. They know that I slept in the garage. Like, they know. So, I slept in a house with 13 different people to doing it. Like, there's been no flipping privilege. It's been straight hustle and grind. And I feel that every time something epic that I'm experiencing happens, I don't feel like, oh, shame on me. Like, I shouldn't be able to enjoy it. It's like, no, stuff that. That's like, I literally still remember when we took over the top floor of this one building for Collab. I literally put on Drake, started from the bottom that we're here. And I had the whole team that wanted to help me do the thing. I was like, no. I want to do this myself. So I literally put it on repeat, cranked it, and for 8 hours straight up to like 3 a.m. or some shit, I just fit out the whole top floor by myself on that song on repeat, because I want to be like, no, I'm doing the work. I want that sweat to do it. So it's a headspace with it, but you're exactly right. Privilege comes in all forms, but I feel when it's earned, it's to be enjoyed.
And I 100% agree. 100% agree. I'm thinking you're saying that people are now realizing they can do things like this, like work from home and do that sort of thing. I agree. Something I've been banging on about for the past kind of 10 months is for forever. I mean, I can remember adverts from Vodafone actually where, they'd show the office phone and they'd go, hold up one of these things of the era and go, the office phone rings and it goes to the cell phone. This might have been 12, 15 years ago. You can get your answer phone anywhere now. So this is this new technology that you could be out of the office, crazy, phone an office number, and they could still get through to you. And we've been talking for a very long time about we could work from home, you could do this. I know broadcasters who wired their houses up with ISDN lines, so if at some stage in the future they wanted to broadcast from home, they could. But no one ever did in New Zealand, especially. You look at radio in America, and all of the big American radio hosts pretty much operate out of a studio in their house or in their own, office in their own space, not in a big massive building with all the other announcers. And then COVID happens, and then everyone does it, and everyone goes, this kind of works. I can still work from home and have a better work-life balance, and that means my workplace can just have a smaller staff in a smaller building and not have the same outlay of a massive $10 million business hub. They can just have a small one, and and I'm interested where to from here with that whole thing. I'm wondering, are we going to keep some of this? Let's say the vaccine works, and let's say post-COVID we have the choice to go back to the way it was. Who knows if we do or we don't, but let's say we do, or not. I wonder if a group of businesses will realize that actually this working remotely, working from home, giving staff and people who run their own businesses the opportunity to have more of a home work-life balance will be something we continue on with.
I totally agree. The bit that people are probably overhyping now is the need for human connection in person. The craving of that social thing is causing a lot of issues, because a lot of people's homes, they're missing people and missing high fives and missing that. Simultaneously, a lot of these business owners are realizing, maybe we can have a bit more flexible thing. We interviewed Clive Omerod, who's the CEO of Les Mills. So he's one of the bros, and he was saying, they had 3 years worth of digital transformation happen in 3 weeks, but they were prepared for it because they knew that that's where they were going. So all it did was accelerate what was already going to happen. And because everyone set the plan, no one argues it, right? And the majority of other businesses didn't have that. And I've got another friend in the real estate space who runs a big company, and he said, I'm trying to teach 60-year-old John what Microsoft Teams is. This shit is hard. So I think the headspace of how you approach what is possible is one, but then at the end of the day as well, if it comes about team and accountability, do you have a good team, and how do you make them accountable, and do you trust them? Because if you can't trust them, they're going to be slacking off anyways. And it wasn't until I've seen inside some bigger businesses, I never understood why there were systems and processes and structures that were so slow and annoying and shit, until I saw why. And it's because so many people don't actually like their job, and they hide in big organizations. And it's very easy to hide because there's no accountability, because there's no system, process, structure. So the good people who do good shit gets screwed with their time and bullshit to try and prove that they are trustworthy to do their KPIs and their bullshit and their da-da-da-da-da, when actually that's taken away. And the reason they're doing that is because you've got a bunch of bad eggs that have just been shit, but it actually means that you lose a bunch more upside for the business because you've got good people wasting their time doing dumb shit.
Yeah.
That's like, the fuck? So I think what it has done, though, and this is what I feel pretty strongly about, is it's exposed good and bad leaders. It's exposed those who can't communicate well, those who can't be seen as vulnerable without makeup on in front of some staff and a sit down with a cat running in the background and some kids charging through and hitting you on the head or whatever it may be. It's showing a lot more personality of some others that, they're human too. And what I've always found really interesting with a lot of my inner circle that are in business is there is a huge disconnect between who they actually are privately to what they get seen publicly. And it wasn't until this last probably 2 or 3 years I've realized why. And the majority of it is because they've had to have this front and this guard up, because it's just been attack fest from every different angle to try and get to that spot, that there's no weakness, no vulnerability, it's just kind of, it's defense, right? And it would just be weird because I get back channel stuff. Oh yeah, that chick's such a bitch. Stuff her. She has no shit. Blah 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 blah. She's shit. I'm like, do you actually know her? Because that is not. There's such a disconnect between. There's a massive disconnect between what was publicly seen as the CEO of, let's say just CEOs, for example, just to throw, let's go. I got to sit in the meeting with the CEO, and I got to ... The reality for me is it's so bullshit, because the majority of everyone is actually pretty decent, but it sucks if you're at the bottom of the food chain and you only get to see the power of these number ones really sporadically, because you build up this vision about the perfection image of what this thing is. And at the end of the day, there's flipping humans. Everyone's just trying. Like, even if they stuff up, they're still flipping trying. You're not getting paid that much money to run an organization and, not try. Because at the end of the day, it's their legacy. But what I would say on the flip side of that is a lot of CEOs and owners and stuff, they don't want to step down in their LinkedIn profile. Maybe not the ones, but more the twos, like the marketing manager or general managers or directors or any of that shit. They don't want the public loss of a step down if they fail.
Right.
And so a lot of time they're on defense for their own personal agenda, if they've got a family, wife, kids, husband, partner, whatever it may be as well. So I have empathy and understanding from that side too. So to answer that whole little ramble is, yeah, I feel it's very complicated, and it's not until you get in it to understand it. It's just very easy from the outside to talk shit about everything. But after you get in, you actually get to see it. You're like, oh shit, that's why. And so I think the understanding piece is pretty important.
I think we always need to think about that, about what it's like from the inside. I remember, and like what it's like from the other perspective as well. I remember doing talkback and talking about, it was a particular issue, and I think it might have been Aotearoa, and it was about, you know, there was a quote unquote gang house, or there was a person living in a house, and there was gang members coming to that house, and, you know, of course all the neighbours wanted them evicted and kicked out and that kind of stuff, and it was a talkback topic, and I used to often do a thing where I'd just go, and then what? And so, okay, let's play this game. Let's say that this solo mum with 4 kids, whatever the situation was, gets evicted because her house is being frequented by gang members. Fine. Then what? And they'd go, what do you mean? I go, okay, well then what? What happens to the kids? They haven't got a home. What happens to the mum? Hasn't got a home. What happens if they get another house and they're now your neighbours? Or they're living in the van at the end of your driveway? Or just what happens to the health of the kids? What happens to how they survive? What happens to, you know, keeping these kids safe? And it would always try and at least get them to step back and look at the broader picture and say, what else could happen? What else could happen from this? And what about from the perspective of that person? What happens if she doesn't want the gang members coming around all that much? And actually, rather than just kicking her out, we figure out a way for society to wrap around her and help her in that area. I don't know, just things to get people thinking to the next step. We often have these conversations at a very, I guess, what I'd call level 1. You don't go deep at all. You go, this is what I'm going to talk about. And actually, there's 17 levels of nuance to this conversation that unless you really go through them all, you can't look at a subject matter or an issue honestly until you get to it and get to the end of it, which is...
Well, there's also like, yes, but at the end of the day, there's always a moral yes or no of what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. The hard bit is when you have to unpick the layers of all those other different things, because the majority of the time people are so single focused for their one. It's like camera lenses, right? They've only got the 50mm 1.4 on, so they just see that. They don't actually have the fisheye and go like, oh, there's actually, you know? I think it comes with age for most if there's self-awareness, but the most dangerous is when they age, but their lens stays the same.
Yeah.
And then you get scenarios like the John Banks thing from last week, or the million others that have happened over time as well. So, yeah, that's balancing, I guess, age and wisdom and self-awareness versus, you know, common humanity and being a good bastard, you know. And sometimes it's tricky.
I think that's when I look back and, you know, not to go yay me, but I think about 35-year-old talking to 60-year-olds who are going, oh, you know, these migrants who come to the country, they should be a part of the community. They shouldn't stick to themselves. And my response to them would be, so when have you asked your migrant neighbour over for dinner to invite them into your community? And they're like, well, we haven't. I'm like, well, you know, normally when someone new turns up to you, to the thing, they will knock on the door, but you have to open it and ask them in. And maybe sometimes they'll be too shy to knock on the door, so you need to open the door for them and call them in. And they hadn't done that yet.
Yep. I do feel that there feels like a wave shift of openness and vulnerability and a bit more self-awareness and leading with heart and soul that's happened in New Zealand over the last 10 years. And if you look at that intersection across the type of people that are popping out with it, with the collective of these type of new leaders, these new young bucks, that's setting us in a way more positive direction. And I genuinely feel that, you know, like the John Kerwin effect is real. The butterfly effect of creating a Trojan horse for that one simple thing has had a bigger effect on New Zealand than probably realized. And I think it's opening the doors for more, like the Craig Hudsons of the world and the Mike Kings and the Richie Hardcores and all of these other sort of characters that are popping up and doing their things a bit more proudly. It's like, give them the megaphone 100%, because, you know, more good people talking about good things that actually matter, that changes society. Because as soon as it becomes cool to care, you flipping care, you know. Not say it's like, you know, not that commerce is ruthless and whatever, but which it can be. I just feel there's a new type of leadership that is happening in society and culture in New Zealand, and I feel a lot more positive about it because I know a lot of these good humans and they're flipping good people. So why not give the power to the good bastards? Stuff it. Hell yeah. You know?
I wonder. I mean, we've always talked about the society changing via attrition. I wonder if that actually has some truth in it then as well, because if you look at it from the Jacinda Down sort of thing, Jacinda's just turned 40, and the people you're mentioning, maybe other than Mike King, they're all sort of younger, and they're at some stage they have to take over because people who are older, die or can't physically do things anymore, or want to retire and spend their golden days doing other things. So I wonder if that. I mean, I think. When I was kind of...
COVID's forced that, though. That's the thing. COVID's forcing that because a lot of the weak leaders, they don't have the headspace and the vulnerability and the self-awareness to realize that they don't have the skill set to actually lead through this technology revolution, that now is the perfect time for a lot of these shit leaders to bounce out, because it's the perfect thing of like, COVID, I'm out off into the sunset, opposed to digging your heels in for the next decade to try and drill this thing back. So I actually think one of the best things to happen in business through COVID is a bunch of these old shit leaders who haven't actually embraced what the future can be, piss off. And I think it's flipping great because they've got an excuse. We've given them a Trojan horse for the bad ones to bail happily, and we'll send them on their flipping merry way with their bullshit Rolex. Next. Sorry, I just there's certain things I care about, and that's one thing I feel pretty strongly about. So sorry about that, Pat.
No, I like it because what it also says to me is for those people, and I think all of us at some stage have been in the position where we're the good one in the room. And I'm not saying like a yay me thing, but that we're working our asses off. We're trying to drive forward in whatever the area is, and there's other people who are kind of dragging the group down. So for whoever that is in whatever space of life that is where those ones are dragging them down, dragging the group down, dragging the individual down, you're not helping them move forward as well as they could. Yeah, if they do piss off, that can do nothing but good things for the rest. It's a little bit Darwinian. It feels a little bit sort of vicious, but it sounds a little bit like survival of the fittest. Get rid of the weak, bad ones, and let's move forward with the stronger pack.
It's not that it's stronger; it's that they're better. They're embracing the future. They're like if you had a leader that doesn't believe in digital transformation of what Google Meets or Microsoft Teams or cloud-based, just any of the basic shit that we're now living in. For us, it's basic, but for them, that's a foreign territory, which I also understand because there's fear of not understanding that. But if you were to say because they've been there for 50 years, they should stay there for the next 50, just because they've been there for 50 years, that's not where we're at as a society and a people. And I think a lot of the time, why I get, precious about it is because those are the people that choose what doors to open for others. And I feel
and they're also the people who suck up perhaps 20% of the income from their business. Those guys at the top, they get the massive salaries. I remember working for a media company. I won't say which one it was because I might work with them again in the future. But they had a deal with one of their employees where they purchased said employee a Bentley as a part of said employee's contract with them. And it wasn't that said employee, often you'll get these lease vehicles. They purchased a $450,000 Bentley for this person. And I was at the same time, maybe it is a little bit of a woe is me, kind of working off direct, and got told that I couldn't get a pay rise because of the financial commitments to the said employee. And I was just like, fuck. And I mean, but actually that's a situation where said employee was amazing. And they were very, very good at what they did. But the kind of, there's not a bell curve anymore. It's, it's certainly exponential that those top 5% probably suck up 80% of the income. So if some of those aren't pulling their weight and they do fuck off, then that probably helps others, move up, move forward, earn more, do better.
Yes. Another way to think of it as well as the efficiencies through technology can create a lot more of a buffer of playroom for finances than people realize if they just would want to look at it as well. So, it challenges leaders, and it's something that we'll see more of in the future, I'm sure.
You talked before about fear of future regret. That was the phrase you used. I jotted it down when you were talking about what drives you. I have a similar thing, and it's maybe not quite as big picture as you and talking about your own thing, but I often talk to my kids about making their foresight their hindsight. And I say to my kids, if we can figure out how to make our foresight our hindsight, then that'll help us make decisions on things that could blow up in our faces. And it can be anything as silly as, I often think when I'm sitting down to use the facilities in the reading room, so to say, that where is my cell phone? Because if I know people who have dropped iPhones into toilets twice. I know someone did it twice in 2 weeks, and I kind of think, hang on, this is in the wrong space. If I don't do this, it might fall in. So I'm trying to make my foresight by hindsight, but that's a very silly example as to, fear of future regret. But with my kids and stuff, I do that a lot, and I'm like, sometimes we're having decisions and we talk about doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, well, what could happen? What are the payoffs long term? How do we look back on that? If we go forward, how do we look back on that? And are we happy with that decision? Is it the chances are, and I don't do it to freeze us in a position of no decision making. I do it more based on probability, like statistically probable. Like when we go past this decision into whatever we're going to do, when we look back, we'll be happy with it. And I think it's probably similar to your idea of the fear of future regret, but we look at it as as our foresight being our hindsight, because we all know that hindsight is 20/20. And in hindsight, we can say that was the perfect decision we made. But if we can think about it from a foresight going, when we look back at this decision, will we be happy? It's a way we can start to move forward and hopefully make better decisions.
Yeah, I have this thing, Pat, called I pre-mortem everything. So instead of post-mortem after it's stuffed and dead, I'll pre-mortem it before it starts to figure out where it could crash and why it could crash and what could go wrong and how I would fix it before I start. So I actually, because I play chess, I love chess. I've always played chess. Huge fan of chess, and it's not checkers. It's chess, not checkers. I'm not playing. I do this, you do that. It's very reactionary. It's very just short-term blah. I love chess. Of cool. I'm going to position and make this move here, and then this is going to happen, and I'm going to do this, and that kind of that multi-layering down of strategic thinking of what may happen in the real world. That shit like that super excites me. I'm like, that's flipping rad, because then what happens is these things happen. Then I get a text message and someone's just like, you flipping called it. You flipping called it. You called it. Because I'll almost, it's not Nostradamus type stuff, but you can. Sorry, you there, mate?
Yeah, we're still with you.
I lost you for a second. You can always predict energy. Sorry, there you go.
Yep.
Give me 1 sec.
You're in Silicon Valley, aren't you? Isn't that the place with the amazing internet?
No, my elbow knocked out the HDMI cable, so I lost it. I was so hyped. I was getting into it. No, with when I pre-mortem, I absolutely love that stuff, because you can always predict. If you can predict people, you can predict energy, and when you can combine certain energies over time, you can predict outcomes. And it's something that I've always known that I've been able to be pretty good at with different people and scenarios and situations. And so that's a huge strength of I've been able to see things pre-mortem, try and pre-stack it out, and then address before it even starts how you'll try and fix what hasn't been broken yet.
Yep, I love it. And I also, to put it into a more crude context, I don't necessarily talk to my kids like this, but I often talk to people about having a bullshit nerve. Now, just in the back of my head, just about the bottom of my neck, I've got a bullshit nerve. And when that bullshit nerve goes off and goes, I'm like, okay, let's just give this a little bit more thought and investigation before we move forward.
Happens over time, though. You live and you learn, hopefully.
Hey, tell me something. Did I read, this is probably the dumbest question ever, because if you say no, it'll be over, but did I read that you got COVID?
Yeah, bro.
Tell me about that. Tell me about COVID.
Yeah. I don't really want to talk about too much of it, but I'll talk a little bit.
You can just that's fine. You can just say let's not talk about that. That's fine.
No. I'll say this. I'm pretty fit, dude. Like I'm not, like 80 on a couch and haven't moved around. And when it hit me, I would walk 10 meters and I would have to stop and sit down and try and breathe to catch my breath. Like it was stuffed. It was the weirdest. And the energy was so sapping. It wasn't like hey, I'm sick and I'm down for the count. It was like you've got your iPhone's on 1% or your Samsung Galaxy 20 Plus, whatever, in case Simon's watching, that I still haven't switched to yet, but maybe in the future. And the charger is like a 1 volt and it just gives you like one more percent, and then 1 more percent. But even more so than that, it's for like a couple of weeks, like 3 weeks, my brain was foggy. Like I've always known my body really well through snowboarding, like in my sport. Like I could tell the difference of, like I would know like I could just feel my whole thing of like, and my brain was slow. It was like I could feel the glugginess and this fog, and I didn't talk to anyone like on the phone for any business stuff or anything in New Zealand for 3 weeks. Couldn't do it because my brain wasn't there, and I felt that I'd be a liability. So my advice to you in New Zealand is 100% the shit's real. 100% if you get that shit in, it will destroy the flipping economy. 100% it is contagious as shit, and people can get it. And this is me saying it, and no one pays me to say shit. Like, I'm a younger, fit dude, and it stuffed me up. I can see how 100% it if you are older with it in your lungs, like it felt like I was at the top of a super high mountain that I just hiked from top to bottom, and then I had to do it again, and wow. your lungs are just stuffed. So it was stuffed, man. I don't wish that shit on anyone. And it's weird because then some people are like, oh no, I had like a little nose and flu and it was sweet. And some people are like, I'm in the flipping hospital and I'm stuffed on my ventilator and I'm 30. You're like, geez. So it was shit. Basically, I was off the grid for a month. It sucked.
I was hoping that when you talk about lungs and stuff, I heard that Dave Chappelle currently got it or has had it and stuff, and he smokes like a fucking chimney and never stops. And I'm just like, oh please, there's going to be some point at some stage that probably knocks out someone who's significantly profiled and who was doing amazing things. And I'm just like, not Dave. Let Dave be one of those guys that just gets the sniffles. We just want the sniffles for Dave. Nothing more serious than that. But as you said, you're in California at the moment, and obviously there's been a change of government or change of White House in the last few weeks. Are you seeing a difference today than, say, a month ago as to the response to COVID and what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Yes and no. I flew back last February and I've been here for a month, but I haven't been anywhere in the last... I've been to my family's houses, and we did one trip in the weekend up to the coast, and I did one trip for 2 hours in the city. So I haven't seen the world really. I haven't been out and done anything for a year basically. So I don't know physically, but I know when I was in the city for 2 hours a couple of months ago, it was like a flipping ghost town and super weird because all the businesses had bailed. And it's super trippy to think about a busy city like San Francisco in the middle of the city and there's like no one there. Super weird. A bunch of homeless people basically taking the whole thing over and that's stuffed. But the tension definitely feels like there's been a big sigh of relief and just a calming energy through politics of the shift in power. Now, for right or wrong, whatever it is, don't give a shit. What I do care about is the energy has mellowed. It doesn't feel like there's more fires being started every single day and it's tense and you're on edge and you don't know what's going to happen next. That kind of, you're in the dark and someone's about to punch you, but you don't know when type thing. That's how it maybe felt for a little bit. Once again, you take the moment in society and you extrapolate out, potential recession and lockdowns and money and health and just politics and everything. It's been a pretty lethal combo of a bunch of that stuff. And I'm glad hopefully we've turned a page to just some safer days for more people, man. Shit. Like, it's pretty messed up.
You obviously would be more primarily based in the US than New Zealand then, eh? You said your wife is American and kids, and I know you don't talk about that personally, but are they American-born American citizens? So we'd come, so obviously lived in New Zealand, but I've always been back and forth from the States for about 20 years. We came over for baby number one because her family's over here. Then we went back to New Zealand and then came over for baby number two. And then I was just going back and forth every month. And then we're going to go back. And then COVID hit. And so we've been chilling. So that's where we're at. Because I was also wondering, it's a bit of a flippant question perhaps, but when you're in New Zealand, you're based in Auckland, why aren't you based in Queenstown? Surely as an ex-professional snowboarder, should be where home base is in New Zealand.
Great. Oh, Wanaka over Queenstown any day.
Sure.
Stuff you Queenstown, Wanaka for life. But no, I got lots of friends there too. It's just, as a Wanaka boy. When I come in, I try to be, and I'm there, my business interests, most of my network, and most of my time on the ground is physically in Auckland. So that's where I'm at for that. I travel everywhere. But
and I guess if a third of the population's in one place and you're doing business, that makes sense to, I guess, be where most of the people are and most of the industry, I guess. Do you know who Pete Bethune is? He's an
I
environmentalist. I had him on a couple of weeks ago, just after his snake bite survival, and we had a bit of a chat. And he was talking about, going through the snake bite and going through, his mortality, basically, while he was getting to the boat, realizing this could be it for him. And he talked about getting to the end of his life. I'm paraphrasing poorly. I apologize to Pete if he sees this. He talked about getting to the end of his life and being happy with it. And he said the most interesting thing. He said he talks to CEOs and he talks to big companies, he talks to groups, and he says to them, what are you most proud of? And they say often, my kids. And he goes, it's not enough. And he goes, it's not enough. Anyone can do that. It's not enough that you've just had kids. What else have you done? What are you most proud of? What are you going to leave sort of as your, after you're gone, what are you going to be remembered for? And if it's just your kids, it's not enough. And I'm wondering, as I'm thinking to you, someone who's done so much in a relatively short amount of time, you're a young man compared to many of us old pricks. If it all finished today sort of thing, what would you be most proud of today? And you've got to, for people who don't know, go to Robett.com. Is that right? Robett.com. And look at the video on there about Play This at My Funeral. Right. It's great. It's a great watch. Yeah. But I'm wondering if it all ended today, what would you be most proud of? And let's say, by the graces of, the flying spaghetti monster or whatever you want to believe in, if it all ends in 60 years from now, what do you think you're going to look back on, hindsight being foresight, and be most proud of?
I've always thought about, and I've said it for ages, legacy is greater than currency. And it's the legacy of, when you talk about, when you think about, if you've got self-awareness and you've got youth, and then you love chess and you play long game, and then you think about legacy, not currency, and then you think about opening doors for others, when you combine all those things together, you're playing a different game. Like I'm playing a different game now because I'm not reactionary to the moment of others for what they want for this right now. I'm like, okay, well, what's this going to look like? This interview going to look like in 100 years when my kids watch it? Just the whole, that whole world. So for starters, I'd like to think, obviously, my wife and my kids and my whānau are pretty dope. I am super pumped that the closest ones to me today have been with me for a very long time before any of the shit. And I think that's something that so many people can't say, because you lose those connection points. You go into different worlds and you drift apart and whatever, but you talk to any of my OG crew from day one, same shit, same, and we're in totally all different worlds now. And I love the fact that I've probably been, like, I'm very proud of a small group of my friends which have been with me from day one, that I know the relationships that we've had over, coming into decades now has been cool. And the consistency of the type of people that have been close with me for that long. Not many people can say that. Because a lot of the time, if there's not consistency with the friendship, let's say if someone else, goes off and does some other shit and they fully change and their moral or ethical compass gets compromised and they do whatever. I've never had to deal with any of that with those crew. And I think the consistency of those type of people who you keep really close says a lot. And also just like, I love the idea of, like right now, if it came out and said, okay, Robett's he's going to start a hot dog stand up on Ponsonby Road, and he's just going to be doing that and doing live streaming out of it, talking to some people. No one would be like, what? They'd be like, oh, of course he is. Oh, Robett's going to go do ... I feel that I'm now in a spot that whatever I decide to do ... no one's going to be like, oh, he doesn't have the right to do that. It's going to be, shit, of course he's going to flip it. Yes, like, why not? And I think that's pretty cool because it gives you freedom to operate and do and genuinely go after shit that you're passionate about and care about. And that freedom is something that so many people don't have. Like, I genuinely today, I don't feel, and people say it all the time, but I don't feel I've actually worked like a job or something that I've ever had. Like, yes, I've worked, but it's shit I've enjoyed doing. I've never really done anything I have hated. And if I have, it hasn't lasted for anything, and I've just bailed out straight away. But I would like to say that so far, if it ended today, I've literally been able to do whatever I wanted. Even when I didn't have wins, I was still so into, even if it was a loss, the time wasn't regret because it was learning. So I'm still pumped. I'm like, cool. And I think a lot of people don't have that. I think. And so maybe it's the thing, I've probably got a very low life regrettage percentage, an extremely low, and to do that when you're not so private, and obviously, I'm out there and I'll just say whatever I think and just do my own shit and whatever. Like I don't care, but I care, but I don't care because I keep saying it or doing it. So don't know if that's smart or not, but I think freedom in that is cool. And maybe for all of it is if you can survive truly being you regardless. Not that it's cool now to wear a hoodie and a t-shirt, but I've definitely been against the grain of most rooms I've been in forever. So it's maybe cool to do that, but it wasn't. So, well, if I was to work back, I would like to think that, like Groms, whānau, tight click, cool shit commercial, and helped a shit ton of people doing cool stuff. Because you can help people, but if you're not having fun, it's a bit boring. I think there is a way to have it all. Maybe that's what I'm still trying to figure out. But the balancing of it's tricky. Time will tell. Because I can guarantee, like Andrew Patterson interviewed me when I was 26 and 30 or whatever it was. He's a couple times a few years apart, and we joke about it because we can both see the changes in me because I'm so self-aware enough of it as well, and he is too because he's obviously a pretty smart dude. And I said to him, look, I'll get 40, it will change. I'll get 45, it will change 50. But, I don't think my legacy will be up to me to determine now. It will be the long tail of effects of decades of opportunities for others that get to spots which I'll never see. And if I was one small part of it, then that's pretty dope. I'll find out when I'm 80 and a 40-year-old comes up to me like, yo, I saw this podcast in 2050. You talked to some dude with the beard from Dunno's. You said some shit about something. And I was like, hell yeah. So I went and did some shit, but you never, the butterfly effect.
You said some shit about having fear of future regret. And at that point I decided I'm not going to have fear of future regret.
Yeah. Because that's the thing you can't get back. And at the end of the day, most other people don't. It's not that you've got it figured out. It's just that when you have a different lens on things, your perspective's different. My perspective now at 35 is what, like I joked about this with wifey. I went back to Tahoe in summer with my two daughters. They got a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we're on the waterfront looking back, and then my daughter's standing on this rock. And I visually remember like 20 years ago, I was here just getting drunk over there doing whatever. But here, like literally physically here, and then 2 decades later, my lens has totally shifted as I was physically in the same space, but my world was different. And I think that there's something in there around, the places stay the same, but the person changes, and it's not going to these mountains, these lakes aren't going anywhere, but you will change, and then how you see that same space is different. At 18, you're like, how do I shred every day and go party with my friends and chuck 13 of us at a house? And you come back with a couple of grums and you're thinking, maybe we could do a bit of, a little bit of take the kids out on a little canoe and we could just go have a little, you know what I mean? It changes. So I think, places change. Places don't change, but the people do. And being aware enough of like when you've been somewhere before or done something, those things matter, And I don't know if it's me being sappy because I got 2 daughters and not enough testosterone around the house, but I think there's probably more depth in those than most.
Hey Robett, it's been a pleasure talking to you. As I said, you're a cool cat. I think we could do this again and do it on all sorts of other things as well. But it's really nice to hear. I have to say. I think, and I know you do some work might be the wrong word, but you have some input into trying to get rid of the tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand. And I think part of the tall poppy syndrome is we have to kind of buy into it as well. So then you get people who don't want to put their head up above the pulpit or parapet, if it's the right word, to be tall poppy, so they don't do anything. It's really nice and refreshing to hear someone who is not only fighting the good fight to help others get there, but is happy to put their head up. That's what it is. It's you're happy to put your head up. And I'm not suggesting that there are people who are trying to tall poppy you. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. I don't know.
Oh, mate, there's plenty to do.
Okay, all right, sure.
There are plenty. Don't stress about that. But no, to your point though, Pat, is I feel that I'm I'd happily throw myself under the bus first. So then I'm that Trojan horse that other people can just like talk shit about whatever. It's like, cool, all right, because I can take it. I can take the ammo. But at the same time, those people that do it, I always talk about this 8 Mile thing. At the end of 8 Mile, Eminem wins because he destroys himself first in front of everyone. No one else has got shit. So I'm the same, like, dude, yeah, yes, I swear I do this. It's like, now what are you going to say? Cool. I got some ego and bullshit and rah-rah. Hell yes. And then I don't. And I do this and that next. But if I can do that for others, because you have to. And I always think about, innovation is bravery in action, where they have the internal bravery first to go and try and go do. And when they can do that, then they are not going to have their future regret. It's very airy fairy, but I know because I get the messages and the Facebook things and the, hey, we ... and I win in ... and now my life is better. I get a bunch of that shit. I never talk about it, but I know it works because it's happening and people message me and I just never talk about it publicly. So I think stuff like that's pretty important as well, but you never know until, time will unravel and these things.
Dude, that is,
a long game, it changes.
that is a powerful scene, that last scene in 8 Mile. And for people who don't know it, as you've just said, he basically, the idea of the rap battle is they take as much piss out of each other, much shit as they can. And Eminem just says, I did get shot by Cheddar Bob with his gun, or Cheddar Bob shot himself with his gun, or whatever the lines are. And, and at the end of the whole thing, his whole point is, no matter how shit my life is and what a loser I am, I'm still standing here saying fuck the free world, I think is the exact quote from memory.
Well, why it's so amazingly powerful is if you front foot all your weaknesses, what are they going to say?
Yep.
Like, even if you're not trying to do to ship or whatever else. So you just think, okay, cool. What are my perceived weaknesses? Is it true? Most of them usually are in some form. It's like, cool, I'm this. All right, sweet. Well, now if I've said it and I've taken the ammo away from you, what are you going to say? Cool, bro. All right, next. And that the underbelly of energy of others going against the tall poppy usually comes from a place of insecurity around seeing things they don't have or having regret for places they haven't been or are at. And so I always, stop and see the other side. And when you do that, a lot of the time you end up just feeling sorry for the other person. Yeah.
It's like often the bully at school is the one who's actually scaredest and loneliest and doesn't actually know, is fearful of what's going on around them. And that's how they strike out. It's like, it's often I think there's a huge amount of jealousy involved with that tall poppy syndrome. Why the fuck are they doing that? How can they do that? Why can't I do that? They shouldn't be doing that if I can't do that. It's like, it's sickening. And I think there's things we love about different cultures, and sometimes we probably get a bit sick when we say we. I'm talking maybe about New Zealanders or myself or the world, a bit sick of America's rah-rah, we're the best. But then the flip side of that, we also should get sick of, we do nothing well. The underplaying of everything in New Zealand, which is, no, we're okay. Everything's average. We shouldn't do that either. Celebrating your successes and acknowledging your weaknesses, I think, is the best way to move forward. Imagine if the All Blacks didn't do that. They didn't push forward what their strengths were and they didn't try and cover off their weaknesses, they'd get thrashed every single time.
Yep. On the flip side of that, and something that I try to be mindful of too, is if you're waving the flag of the good fight, you can't just hide behind the veil of, I'm just going to throw myself under, and if you don't upgrade, stuff you, because then it's actually just arrogance overtaking the reality of the intention of what you're trying to do. The tough part, and I've 100% at times done that, and I've got a close circle and they'll use the word, pineapple if I'm being an arsehole, and they'll text me or whatever. And it's true though. So you need to be able to, once again, to that point around knowing where you're at, is having the self-awareness to understand like your spot, and even the intentions are right. Sometimes the execution's off. Like I would like to say the majority of the time my intention's good. A lot of the time as well, the execution is off. Probably said the wrong thing, probably swore at the wrong person, probably came a bit too rah-rah, whatever the thing may be. Those things are all 100% real. So sometimes it sucks if you lose relationships or opportunity because the other side has dismissed the message because they don't like the messenger. And that's maybe one of my regrets, maybe through my early 20s, a little bit, maybe, probably. But then as time goes on, I've actually realized, no, because if you're a good human, you can usually see through all that shit and realize what the intentions are rather than the execution. So in a good way, a lot of the people who I would never mess with, I've never messed with, even though, they can rah-rah around the campfire. They don't need to be in my circle now, and that's totally fine with me.
I think that's so interesting about the messenger over the message. And I think that, like, it's interesting hearing you say you grew up with the kind of music and stuff you listen to. You know, the first album I bought was Beastie Boys. I've still got an original American import of NWA and their original album. It's sitting upstairs on LP that I bought. Sounds Queen Street in 1988, 87. They were $30 for an album because they were US imports. And I love looking back at that area and that culture. And although the movie Straight Outta Compton is a little bit, you know, skewed as Hollywood does do it, looking at those kind of messages, they are the example of free speech in America, speaking truth to power and actually saying this is what's happening in the streets. And then you have mainstream media going, you look wrong, you sound wrong, you're using the wrong words, therefore we will dismiss your message. And I think it's you do that at your own peril.
Well, look at what happens over with legacy. See how this is played out. Most influential culture, most influential people, most influential fashion, most influential community, whatever it is. You know, you can't stop the tidal wave of good momentum if the intent's right and the product's good or whatever else. Or even, you know, I think dismiss the messenger at your peril, because sometimes there's a lot of, you know, I've got a couple of friends. I've got this one guy in marketing. Intention's great. 90% of his ideas and stuff stupid as shit, but the 10% is flipping genius.
Yeah.
Now, if people just dismissed him because they didn't think he's just full of shit, and I was like, no, he's 90% full of shit, but the 10% is 120% better than anything you've ever seen to stuff you. And I think that's why when you can be open to, you know, like I like to think that I'm a pretty relatable and pretty approachable dude, and it happens every time I'll be out anywhere, and if, you know, friends with LinkedIn or YouTube, whatever, and crew will just literally roll up and be like, yo, what's up, man? I'm like, hey, bro, what's up? And it's very, it's cool because it validates the fact that they don't feel that you're threatening to say what up or actually approach. And even though they feel that they maybe fully know you and you don't know them, you're not going to be like, I'm sorry, who are you? But it's like, dude, people are people. I don't give a shit. And the great bit is some of the craziest, coolest things happen when they either you bro down or whatever it may be. And those things, those opportunities, those friendships would never have happened if it wasn't for the technology or you putting yourself out there. Like 90% of my world wouldn't be what it is now if I didn't put myself out there. Yeah. So I'll take the 10% of blah, 1%, like 1% of blah, whatever. I'll take the 1% of bullshit for the 99% of awesomeness. It's the cost of doing business. So I think of relationships and energy different. And as long as you can, you know, front foot that 1%, the 99's pretty flippin' sweet.
Hey, yeah, I love it, and it's true. Unfortunately, I think so many people in the world can't handle the 1%, so they don't try and attain the 99, which is sad. And I don't know how we build resilience in a generation or a person or an individual or a community to help them fend off that 1% that's always going to be there, because the 99% far, as you say, far exceeds and outweighs the negative of the 1%. But I guess that's what we need to figure out and grow with as a society. I was going to ask you one more thing, which is, you've said it a few times here. So I'm wondering when you're going to start your new podcast, which is going to be called On the Flip Side. I think that would be a good podcast for you, because you've said that about 6 times today, because it's a way of looking at the whole overall issue. So I'm wondering, when does your new podcast On the Flip Side come out? Is that going to start soon?
Well, the reason I keep saying that is because, say with politics, I've got good homies on both sides.
Yeah.
And no one knows who my homies are and blah, blah, and I never say whatever. But even with, you know, banks and corporates and whatever, I'm genuinely homies with the most opposite of people on both sides. So I always really enjoy it, because if you get to sit in the middle as a non-conflicting third-party entity that has opinions on both, and you get way more intel if your relationship's legit with someone. And I just think it's always, I love that challenge, that clash of both. And I wouldn't want society to be 100% one way, because you need that 1%. Like, even though the majority of that 1% is done out of insecurity for themselves, their own future regret, versus some actually truth of you being a bit dick sometimes, which 100% happens if, you know, had a few too many whiskeys, whatever it may be. But yeah, I have a feeling if I can be a Trojan horse to talk about things that other people aren't talking about, and happily do it and seeing both sides of it, flipping sweet, because it gets people talking, and action doesn't get executed in the real world until people are actually talking about it or get educated on it. And if you can be a conduit for some of that education or banter, you know, you should be able to talk about these tougher things.
Totally.
And before we go, I know we got to go. I'd like to give you props on the Reed vodka from the Castrona Distillery, which I see in the back right-hand side, batch number. What batch number did you get?
Not entirely sure.
It says on the label on the white at the top, and as it pips around, it's 001, where the cap is.
Oh, where the cap is.
On the cap.
Jeez. On top of the cap. Dude, I haven't got my reading
Is it
glasses
batch 1? Batch 2?
No, it's got
batch
number
one, I mean,
AA40069. That means anything to you? Hang on, we're not
that's
finished.
right.
We're not finished yet. You got this as well.
It's my friend's, and that's, you got the gin. Yeah, nice. The Castrona Distillery is on my buddy's land, and Ash, who did it, we just did a tasting with him last week, and I was fortunate enough to get batch number 1 from that there, and I saw that bottle, I was like, dude, Pat's got the Reed back there. Well done.
I always, well, what we normally do here is you can't see it. Maybe if we chat for 5 minutes after, that's when the real conversation happens. I'll just show you. I'll turn my other cameras on, but the setup I've got in here is like, it's ready for people, you know. And often what we do, you can see there's a a fridge here, and we'll have beers and drinks, and that's why it's Department of Conversation. We talk about, it's like we're talking over a beer, and we often talk over a beer. Got my whiskey up here.
I've got my
Paddy's Irish whiskey, of course.
I've got a Macallan 12 in this one.
Yeah.
I'll have a swig just to support the team.
Nice. Hey, but look, this has been fun, Robett. Thanks so much for jumping in and joining on. It's just a fascinating conversation, and it's the kind of conversation that I've really enjoyed. But hopefully, other people will hear it, like you say. That young guy who's watching this in 10 years from now, maybe will get something from it as well. Mm-hmm. They're always the best kind of conversations.
And why I love long form like this is because I know out of my own doing, there's been a disconnect between the perception versus reality of how my headspace actually thinks and what I do and how I roll without the 2-minute rah-rah stuff this guy on Facebook, whatever it may be. So it's good to show depth, not just width.
Yeah, and what we do is we don't, you probably heard me scribbling away some things here, but any notes I take, I'm basically taking during the episode to reference. This is not a set-up kind of interview. We don't want to do that. That's actually talking about what the mainstream does. I often say to people, this is more like a chat over a beer at a pub than an interview for 6 minutes in a radio station. That's what we try and do. So, bit of fun, hanging out, getting to know people, getting to meet people, and going from there.
Good on you, man. It's when you can commit to, I think you're over 150 now, long form with it, clearly the passion's there and the talent's there. People can't question the intent when so much of it has been done out of that, so full credit to you, because there's probably only a couple of people in New Zealand that have probably done as much. So, good on you. It's awesome.
Robett Hollis, thank you for joining us. People want to find out more about you, Robett, ROBETT.com. Lots of interesting resources.
Yeah, I sell
I
absolutely nothing, and I have nothing to sell, and I don't want anything from you. So please don't try and ask for me to buy anything. I'm not trying to sell anything. There is no course. Actually, there is a course, but it's free. I made it free.
But go and have a look at some of the stuff that Robett's doing. We'll put links on the Facebook page and stuff as well, because there's interesting stuff there, and you're an interesting dude, a crazy cat, and I've loved chatting with you, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon.
Appreciate it, Pat.